This world is awfully big. Girl, this time you're all alone. But it's time you started living. It's time you let someone else do some giving. Love is all around, no need to waste it. You can have it down, why don't you take it? You might just make it after all. You might just make it after all.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It feels like it's been a long time since I've made a deep dive video. It really has. I think it's been since October probably. My last two deep dive videos were about Judy Garland and Shirley Temple, so if you would like to check those out, the links will be in the description below. As always, I want to put a trigger warning before I start any of my videos. I want to make sure people know what they're getting into, so remember, viewer discretion is advised, and let's get to the video. Mary Tyler Moore was born December 29, 1936 in Brooklyn Heights, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York City. Her parents were Marjorie and George Tyler Moore. Her mother was born in 1916 and her father in 1913. Her father was a clerk and her mother, I believe, was a homemaker. Marjorie would give birth to Mary at only 20 years old and George was 23. Her mother suffered greatly with gambling as well as alcoholism, which often affected her mood. Growing up, her relationship with her family wasn't really strong, so she often had to find companionship through films. They would go on to have two more children together. A few years later, they would have John and then Elizabeth in 1956, making Mary 20 years older than her sister. She would go on to attend Rose of Lima Parochial School up until the 3rd grade. Around 1944, when Mary was only 8 years old, her family picked everything up and moved west to Los Angeles, California. There, it has been said her uncle worked at MCA in Los Angeles, and he gave the Moores rave reviews of the city, which was a huge reason for their move. Originally, she enrolled in St. Ambrose School and finished out middle school there, but would go on to attend Immaculate Heart High School, which is an all-girls school. It was considered a day or boarding school, meaning that you could stay there or commute. It's not quite clear whether Mary stayed there or if she stayed at home. But this school has a long list of notable alumni such as Mary herself, Tyra Banks, Dakota Johnson, and most notably at the moment, Meghan Markle. It was during this time her relationship with her family became even more strained, so she decided to move in with her Aunt Bertie. She also would not see her parents only really during holidays or special occasions. While in California, it became quite easier to pursue her dreams of acting and dancing.
When the friends came over,
yes, the families would get together, and yeah, we would. My cousin Gail and I would hijack the family and tie them to their seats, and we would perform numbers that we had seen in the movies. And I think in self-defense, I was sent to dancing school so that, you know, if they had to watch me, at least I'd be trained and it wouldn't be too painful.
Do you want to be a dancer?
That's really what I wanted more than anything. I wanted to be a ballet dancer. I was willing to compromise that and become Sid Charisse or Ginger Rogers.
She studied at World Sister Studio, which is located in West Hollywood Park. With the help of her Aunt Bertie, she would land her first paying job as Happy Hot Point for Hot Point Appliances in 1955. And this was just a few days after her high school graduation. The role was for a dancing magical elf and would advertise during the Ozzie and Harriet show. It was during this time she would meet her first husband, Richard Meeker. They would go on to marry that same year. Richard was a 28-year-old salesman, making him quite older than Mary. Within 6 weeks of their wedding, she would become pregnant with her first and only child. In one interview, Mary describes this elf as a genderless elf, so they had to hide her breasts using copious amounts of binding.
And I was now with just the tiniest hint of a belly, which that was all right, but the breasts were enormous. and I had to get back into that same bandeau, and it was probably one of the most excruciating things in my life.
She sadly was soon let go as Happy Hot Point because of her growing stomach. She gave birth to her son, Richard Jr., in 1956, and while she became a housewife and a mother, she still had interests in her aspirations in Hollywood. She modeled for record covers and would dance in variety shows. Eventually, she would go on to land her first regular TV role on Richard Diamond, Private Detective, as Sam, the receptionist, but with the catch of never actually showing her face, but her legs under a desk.
You never saw my face. You'd see a close-up of my mouth or a shot of my leg or my hand doing something, so you could imagine the most incredibly sexy-looking woman while I spoke like this. Hi, Mr. D. I have your messages for you.
Who's this?
This is Richard Diamond of the Disintegrating Diamonds.
Well, at least you're awake.
Don't take any money on it, Samuel.
You wanted me to make sure you were up. She's due at your home in about 5 minutes.
Who's due?
Dorian Crane. She lives on the right side of the tracks in Beverly Hills.
What side is that?
Mr. Diamond, the board looks like Santa Anita on getaway day. Are you presentable?
Sam, would I be talking to you if I weren't?
Just checking. For Dorian Crane's sake. Bye.
Goodbye, Sam.
She would be paid $90 a day for her work on the show. With inflation, that equals to about $900. According to A&E, the actress would go on to ask for a raise of $10. But the production studio didn't think she was worth it, and soon was replaced by actress Roxanne Brooks. Now, this did not halt her career in any way, but almost helped it. She would appear in TV shows such as 77 Sunset Strip and Hawaiian Eye, both detective shows. And while they were just really small bit roles, they still helped her gain traction and, more importantly, money. When she filed for the Screen Actors Guild, they went on to tell her she couldn't file as Mary Moore.
When I went to join Screen Actors Guild, I couldn't register as Mary Moore. There were already 6 Mary Moores at Screen Actors Guild, and that was the limit. I would have to choose another name. And I was, no, I can't choose another name. I'm Mary Moore. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, we'll put the Tyler back in. And anyway, doesn't that sound serious?
As a side note, this is also why I go by 3 names, Hannah Truly Lisha, because of this Jim. She would go on to audition for The Danny Thomas Show as his daughter, but was told by Danny Thomas himself that he would never have a daughter with that small of a nose. Penny Parker would land the role, and the show would go on to have 11 seasons. Later that year, a show was in the works called Head of the Family. It would center on famous performer and comedian Dick Van Dyke and his family. They needed a fresh face for the wife, Laura Petrie, and that's when Danny Thomas, who was producing the show, remembered Mary as the girl with the funny little nose and the 3 names.
Script, and I started to read it with him, my heart just fluttering out of control.
She read 2 lines, and I stopped her. I heard something in her voice that got to me.
He put his hand on my head, just like that. And he said, "Come with me." And he lifted me up out of the chair, and we tore down the hallway and turned right into Sheldon Leonard's office, Danny Thomas's partner, who was going to produce this show, and said, "Sit down and read it again with me." And he's going like this to the guys. Look at this. And we read it again. And I don't know what was so special, but they all thought it was. And the next day, before noon the next day, I got a call from my agent. "You've got the job."
Obviously, this show would change to The Dick Van Dyke Show. This role helped her career blossom into the actress she became. It first aired in 1961 when she was just 23 years old, and ended in 1966 when she was 28. But even in that short time, the show would break many barriers for women during that time by wearing pants regularly in the show. The fashion aspect has always been my favorite. Typically, a housewife would wear dresses and frocks, but Laura was really known for her capris and her Jackie Kennedy style. The Kennedys were a huge aspect for this show. They became the aspirational family, which the Petrie family was in a way fulfilling that role on TV. Mary and Dick Van Dyke even remember hearing on set when President Kennedy was assassinated.
Set, rehearsing the Van Dyke show, and I remember the prop man who came out of his little room where he had a radio playing, and he interrupted the director.
And John Chalet, our first assistant director, was sitting in the living room set crying. And we said, "What's the matter, John?"
And I saw John's face fall, and he told us that President Kennedy had been shot, and nobody could quite believe it. But surely he would recover from it, because how could that happen? And then we went into a place where we had a television set, and we watched Walter Cronkite, and we watched him
President Kennedy died
take off those glasses
at 1
and put
p.m.
them back
Central
on.
Standard Time, 2 o'clock,
And then make the announcement.
Standard Time.
We all just sat down and sat there for the afternoon. We didn't rehearse.
And we came back the following week and had to redo the ending of an episode in which somebody had given Rob and Laura a little turtle with a painting on its back. And there had been a picture of Laura Petrie and Rob drawn on the back of this turtle. And I look at it and I say, "Oh, we look just like the Kennedys, don't we?" And dun, 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 dun. And we had to go back and redo that.
While her TV family seemed picture perfect, her real family struggled greatly with the pressure of her newfound fame. She often states that she wishes she was more involved as a mother to her son. As years would go by, she would meet a CBS executive named Grant Tinker. They described meeting for the first time as love at first sight. Mary would go on to separate with her husband and eventually divorce him in 1962, a year into filming for the Dick Van Dyke Show.
He asked if I wanted to go out to dinner, and I said, "No, I think it's a little too close to my separation and divorce from my husband, so thank you." He said, "I understand." And he started to leave the set, and then he caught himself and turned around and came back, and he said, "Well, let me ask you this. A friend of mine has a house in Palm Springs. Would you like to come and stay with me for the weekend?" And I said, "No, thank you. I think that's out of the question."
After just 6 months of meeting, the two would elope in Las Vegas, Nevada. Grant Tinker was born January 11th, 1926, making him 10 years older than her. During World War II, he served in the United States Air Forces and graduated from Dartmouth College. He soon became a TV producer and was heavily involved with shows such as Star Trek and Get Smart. Before settling down with Mary, he had been married to Ruth Byerly in 1950 and would go on to have 4 children with her: Mark, Mike, Jody, and John. Even after winning an Emmy for her work on the show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, the production team knew it was time to put the show to rest, as they didn't want it to become stale and boring. They wanted to end at being on top. So, with the help of her husband, she secured the role as Miss Dorothy Brown in Thoroughly Modern Millie. The film featured Julie Andrews and was a musical, which excited Mary. The film would get mixed reviews, but overall it would make $8.5 million and would win an Academy Award for Best Score. Julie Andrews would win a Laurel Award for Top Female Comedy Performance.
The long-awaited premiere is one of Manhattan's major social events of the season. Millie recalls the delightful days of the 20s, complete with flappers, songs, and dances, with a hilarious story. Star Mary Tyler Moore provides one of the many electrically exciting moments as she arrives. The lovely brunette plays an orphan, Miss Dorothy Brown.
Thoroughly Modern Millie, Academy Award winner, Best Music Score, uncut, direct from its roadshow engagement. Starring Mary Tyler Moore, TV's Emmy Award-winning favorite.
Operator, you have obviously never been in a Chinese opium den.
Carol Channing, that wonderful doll from Hello Dolly, as the wackiest widow since Auntie Mame.
Mary would then go on to try her shot at Broadway as Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's. But when it reached its stage, the critics were very judgmental of her performance. So she decided to focus on her son and try to have another child with her husband, Grant Tinker. But things proved to be quite difficult for the then 29-year-old.
I had a miscarriage, an early miscarriage, and while I was in the hospital, after that they did a routine blood test and they found that my blood sugar was well above the norm, which is supposed to be 70 to 110. Mine was 750. They were amazed that I was still living and not in a coma at the very least. In fact, I went on to make medical history because of that.
A few months later, she would get back up on her feet in a musical special with Dick Van Dyke. She went back to living out her dreams, singing and dancing. Eventually, this would help her land her very own TV series on CBS called The Mary Tyler Moore Show. With the help of her husband, they created the MTM Enterprises in 1969, and the company would produce her new sitcom.
How will you make it on your own? This world is awfully big, girl, this time you're all alone.
The show centered around newly single Mary Richards starting fresh in a new city. She lands a job as an associate producer at WJM, a Minneapolis fictional news station. She lives in a spacious apartment in a 19th century house and has plenty of new friends. The show first aired in 1970 during the midst of the feminist movement. It tackled issues such as birth control, being single, and women independently living without any help.
We even remarked to her mother that she took the pill. And her mother said, do you have headaches? And she said, no, Mother, the pill.
Don't forget to take your pill. I won't.
Originally, when the show was pitched, her character, Mary Richards, was a divorcee, but it was changed because they weren't sure on how viewers would respond to that. While it was considered a female empowerment show, feminist icons such as Gloria Steinman wasn't a fan because she didn't like how Mary was the only character who called her boss Mr. Grant, and that it was lacking the qualities it should have to become a feminist show. And more on a personal note, my relationship with the Mary Tyler Moore Show was really important growing up. I kind of based myself off of this character. I know a lot of young people do that, and I took a hold of it. So I studied broadcast communications, and right out of college, I wanted to become a reporter, and that's what happened. I became a reporter, and then I lived a miserable life, and then I hated it. And it was nothing like what I thought it was going to be, and I was miserable, and no shade to my coworkers, but that was like the worst time in my entire life, so I don't do that anymore, thank God. MTM Enterprises would go on to produce many series such as Rhoda, The Bob Newhart Show, and much more. The company was climbing the ladder and succeeding at it, but with great success comes even more responsibility, and that responsibility grew to be overwhelming for Mary. And soon, like her mother, she went to drinking for comfort. Her alcoholism became a huge wedge between her and her son, Richie Jr.
You know, that drunk is a hard word to define. What is drunk? I don't think I ever was falling down drunk, but I drank too much. I drank to the point where it altered my sensibilities. You know, things that should have been in the back of my subconscious were now in the fore.
Those who are not addicted, I was addicted to cigarettes until a heart attack. I never would have stopped.
I was addicted to that too.
I knew they were dangerous, but I lit it up because I had some need for it. Do you know why you drank?
I think because it smoothed the edges of life.
Would you be drinking while working?
No, I never drank in the daytime. I drank only at night. Oh, sure, on the weekend, sitting around the pool, I'd have a Bloody Mary maybe. But it was contained, and everything that happened in the daytime was cataloged in my mind based on how soon it was until 5:30 or 6 when I would be home and having my martini, which would then become 2 martinis, which would then make everything all right.
Soon on in 1976, she would separate with her husband and colleague Grant Tinker after being together for 16 years.
We were just bowled over. Never expected it to have happened.
Night we were taking Grant to dinner. It was his birthday, and we thought it was, you know, it's close. That's as much as he'd ever let you do. And he said, "Can I bring a date?" And it was the first time he'd ever addressed the fact of dating. You know, and we knew it had to happen sooner or later, so we said sure. So Alan and I got there ahead, and we were just trying to be brave about this person he'd bring in. And all of a sudden he walked in with Mary. They were reconciled, and it was just such a, so that was the shortest dinner I think we ever spent together. They left very early on.
And while they did reconcile, the two would go on to divorce, and fortunately they did stay friends and they were very close friends. Things would change even more for Mary later in 1977 when her hit show would come to an end after 7 years.
It's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye to Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, and my heart's right there. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go.
I started doing all the things you normally do when you're in your 20s. Going out on my own, finding a new life, having left Grant Tinker behind and going to New York and dating, all those awful things, and having to make political decisions on my own and figure out how much tip to leave in a restaurant.
It seems like the end of the 70s for her was probably the toughest years she had gone through, because in 1978 she would lose her sister Elizabeth to a drug overdose. Elizabeth was only 21 years old, studying in college in Los Angeles, California. It's highly speculated that this overdose was not accidental, but Mary denied this majorly. And my opinion on this does not matter. I don't think we should look too far into this because we need to remember this is a family and we need to be sensitive towards that. By 1980, she would land a role in Ordinary People, but this time as a dramatic actress. The synopsis of the film follows a teen whose older brother dies in a sailing accident and is dealing with suicidal ideation. Mary plays the mother.
For hours, I will not stand for it. I can't stand it. I really can't.
What kind of psychiatrists are you? They all believe in dreams.
I do believe in dreams. Only sometimes I want to know what's happening when you're awake.
I don't want to see any doctors or counselors. This is my family. And if we have problems, then we will solve those problems in the privacy of our own home.
I knew something was wrong even before he tried to kill himself.
I think it is a very private matter.
You never came to the hospital. How do you know about the hospital?
Your mother did come to the hospital, Conrad, and you know that.
I just don't know how to deal with it anymore.
Why are you hassling me, huh? Why are you trying to make me mad? Are you mad? No!
He provokes people.
The movie won an Academy Award, and she would also be nominated for an Oscar. This led her to star in a Broadway show called Whose Life Is It Anyway? It was during this time she dated Steve Martin and Warren Beatty. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But both relationships were not serious because she really wanted to focus patching up things with her son, Richie Jr.
Those 2 years that I spent on my own, Richie and I became very close, and Richie began to come to terms with his life and what goals he wanted to set up for himself, and he became a responsible human being, and we became very close. I spoke to him on the phone the night before he died, and he apparently was sitting on his bed holding a gun one of many that he collected, and the gun went off and killed him instantly. That gun was taken off the market afterwards because it had a hair trigger, and that was the problem. And there has been off and on references to Richie having killed himself, which in fact he did. He died of his own hand, but it was not a suicide. He didn't choose to end his life. It was an accident.
Things started looking up for Mary in 1982 when her mother had a bronchial infection. You might be thinking, how is this good? Well, her mother's doctor was Dr. Robert Levine. She thought of him as a handsome man, but was younger than her by 15 years. One day, she made a house call and asked him on a date. A year later, the two married in 1983.
And I called my doctor, but it was Yom Kippur, and he was in temple, and they said, but there is a Dr. Levine who apparently is not so devout, who is willing to talk to you. I spoke to him on the phone. I told him about my mom having had a stroke the year before. He said, get her in right now. Let's do a workup. And as I walked in the emergency room and I saw at the end of the hall this tall, dark, chiseled face with a white coat and a stethoscope and a look of concern, yet tenderness and humor, I just knew that there was going to be something, a flirtation, who knew what. And then when I saw how tender he was with my mother, I was convinced of it. And so we started seeing each other, and I thought it was going to be brief. But we began to take each other very seriously, and thought that we should not throw away something that was as special as this simply because it defied convention.
Mary was excited for her future and often stated in interviews she wanted to have a farm and raise animals. And while things seemed smooth sailing, she would still suffer with health issues. But her addiction with alcohol was becoming better with the help of her husband.
How long have you been sober?
11 years.
Ever go to AA meetings anymore?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
People there, some will go every day.
Yes,
and they've been dry for 20 years.
Right. Well, just as there are all kinds of forms of alcoholism, there are all kinds of degrees to which you go to meetings and fervor that you have as a result of those meetings. And for me, the way I'm doing it, which is an occasional visit, is great, because I'm married to a doctor who probably should have been a psychiatrist. And
that helps?
I get a lot of help at home, yeah.
Do you desire a drink?
No.
Don't desire it?
No.
But unfortunately, this time her health was becoming worse with diabetes.
A lot of trouble with my eyes. I'm very lucky because of the innovation and use of laser treatment in diabetic retinopathy that I can see, and I see very well, but I have come close many times to losing my sight in one or both eyes, and may still.
And unfortunately, she would go on to lose most of her vision in 2014. And in 2017, she would pass away at the age of 80 years old. She left behind a husband and a long legacy in the TV industry.
The management of WJM feels that television can play a critical role in the control of population growth.
For sure it
Television
can,
has
as long as they're watching the old tube. They can't make the population grow.
Television has a responsibility.
Get it, Mayor?
Will you shut up, Ted?
Sorry, did I just hear right? Did I just hear Mary tell Ted to shut up on the air?
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you guys so much for coming along on this journey with me. Mary Tyler Moore is really important to me. She's always been an inspiration in my life and will continually be really important to me. I've always felt really close to her because she was said to be a vegetarian. I'm not sure if she was. I think she was a pescatarian, but I'm a vegetarian and I keep animals really close to my heart, and I love seeing other people do that too. And while she did have a hard time at the end of her life, I kind of wanted to keep this video focused on all of the good things that happened in her life, and I didn't really want to focus on her death more so. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's not as dark as my other two videos, My Judy Garland video was extremely dark, and I remember doing that and being like, oh my gosh, this led me to like the saddest. I would do stuff for that video and it would just make me sad. So I'm glad I've touched more on a happier person, sort of like Shirley Temple. I really like doing the Shirley Temple series. That still to this day is my favorite one. Has the most views on my channel. So if you want to check that one out, definitely the link will be in the description below. As always, I do TikTok. I'm not doing it as much because TikTok is awful. And because I actually have another job other than this. This isn't my full-time job anymore. So yeah, I'm doing what I can. If you want to check out my Instagram, you can too. I'm not really as active on Instagram, but I am more so active on TikTok, and I want to be more active on YouTube as well. As always, my name is Hannah Truly Alicia. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that notification bell to make sure you see all of my wonderful videos that I am making for you guys. As always, have a really good day. Remember to treat animals justly and fairly because animals have lives too. Okay, see ya.